pleasure to welcome Dr. John Brandenburg, who is a plasma physicist and astrophysicist who worked on NASA's Clementine lunar mission before he became interested in NASA images of Mars revealing ancient oceans and artificial structures. Recently, there's been confirmation for one of the ancient oceans that were found, that corroborating the data he first released in 1986. And so that ocean really, by rights of discovery, should be named the Brandenburg Ocean. So he's here with us today on Exopolitics Today to discuss recent developments on Mars and his work in the field of UFOs and extraterrestrial life. Welcome, John, to the show.
Oh, it's always a pleasure and honor to be on your show.
Well, it is really vindication for you, isn't it? That I think it was 1986. There was a conference where you talked about an ancient ocean on Mars. So, do you remember the reaction of the scientists there?
The reaction was very positive. I was speaking to a auditorium with several hundred Mars scientists in it. It was called the MECA Conference, MECA, Mars Evolution of Its Climate and Atmosphere in Washington, D.C. And I had met with a Mars scientist. We had given a paper where we had mentioned the discovery of this ocean. And we talked about it in the context of the Cydonia investigation. And the fellow said, well, we don't know what to think about your Cydonia things, but he says, we loved your ocean. So why don't you just talk about that? And so that was Hal Mazursky, and who unfortunately is no longer with us, but he was a great person. And so I gave the presentation and I showed the outlines of the ocean as they're presently accepted, and gave the estimate for its depth, roughly a kilometer deep, over about 1/4 of the northern hemisphere of about 1/4 of the surface area of Mars. And I am now convinced that this, based on data from meteorites, that this ocean lasted for most, in a liquid state, for most of the history of Mars. So fish swam in this ocean, perhaps even dolphins, who knows?
Right. So this was an ocean that you first discovered through the Mars Clementine mission or the rovers.
Well, actually, it was the Viking. In those days, the most thorough data we had was it was the Mariner 9, showing all the water channels, and then of course the Viking mission in 1976 rephotographed the entire planet at higher resolution. And so we had very good data. The Viking mission was just absolutely technically superb. Everything worked well. They even landed 2 landers on what would have been the old ocean body, the old ocean floor, and they tested the ground and it was salty. So it was a salty, salty ocean clay. And so I put this all together in one paper, and I'm still very proud of it. And it was very well received. I was kind of mobbed after my talk by reporters and other scientists, and it was a great moment for science, I believe. Now, they have now vindicated this discovery with much supporting data. The Chinese rover has now discovered beach sand on the ancient shoreline I joked. I said they even found some sandcastles, and so it's very exciting. Um, I have started taking NASA to task because they don't seem to ever mention my name, Michael, when they talk about this ocean. And I think this is a little shabby in terms of academia. It is because, of course, my interest in Cydonia, Menza, and the archaeology found there. This makes me kind of a controversial preacher, so that I've joked I am the Voldemort of Mars, he who cannot be named.
That is very unfortunate, but I guess it is a vindication that
Yes, it is.
The Chinese missions to Mars have confirmed the data and the interpretation, or what you first discovered back in 1986. That's been confirmed by the
Yes.
Chinese. And naturally, in a normal situation, when a NASA scientist makes a discovery like this, it gets named after him. But as you say, you're maybe NASA, you're a little bit of a hot potato, and they don't want to promote your ideas.
Or a grenade with the pin pulled. I, it, I, I'm of course a little annoyed, but mostly I'm amused, and I will win in the end. This ocean will probably be named after me, as is only right. And most people, it what it does is it also casts light on the phenomenon that the Cydonia, since I discovered this while working on the Cydonia investigation, organized by Richard Hoagland initially, um, it shows that the Cydonia investigation, rather than being some kind of fringe element of the Mars investigations, Mars scientific investigations, is actually been a driver of Mars interests.
It has,
Oh,
definitely.
excuse me. Um, the um, the face of Mars in Cydonia Mensa can be actually called the Rosetta Stone for understanding Mars past. That Mars past was Earth-like.
Now, you wrote about all of
Oh,
this.
excuse me. I seem to have picked up something. Despite the fact that the weather is just beautiful here,
Okay.
um, and but now this also led to the discovery that Mars may have met with foul play. That Mars may have been a Earth-like planet for most of its history. Life began there. We know that life conditions on early Mars and early Earth were almost identical. They had a liquid ocean. They had a magnetic field. They had lots of organic material to as the precursors of life. They had, and of course, uh, a dense atmosphere to allow liquid water to exist. All of these things, and at high temperatures, I mean, at room temperatures, so that all of these things were present on Earth, and life appeared. And life appeared quite early on Earth. They've now traced um, blue-green algae mineral deposits, associated mineral deposits from Australia back 3.5 billion years. So almost as soon as Earth had cooled enough to have a liquid ocean, You had not only life, but fairly advanced life. Blue-green algae are quite sophisticated microbes. They have, DNA, RNA, enzyme systems. This is not a. This is uh, a bacteria that lives. They're called now cyanobacteria, but they are around today, and they function very well. They're very adaptable, and so scientifically, if the conditions we don't know exactly how life arose on Earth. It could have been some kind of spontaneous chemical reaction. It could have been panspermia, spores from space. The details are actually unimportant. All we have to do is assume that the Earth is not unique and remarkable in that regard. And then we must, if conditions on Earth were that, as they were, and life arose, life appeared in a bacterial form and then evolved. We had then Darwin's evolution. Then we must assume that it happened on Mars. Not only life, but the evolution of that life over eons of time. And so we have reached a kind of critical mass in Mars science that we can now say to very high probability that our expectation would be that life began also on Mars as it did on Earth.
Right.
And
So, with regard to that, so the life did evolve on Mars, and you mentioned algae and bacteria. So that would be kind of like primitive organic forms of life. But as far as intelligent life is concerned, I mean, that is something else entirely. And I guess in your book, well, I don't know if this is your first or second book, The Death on Mars, you talk about a planetary nuclear massacre. So that would
yes,
uh, ass- assume that we had intelligent life there that kind of messed it up, went to war against one another, or used nuclear weapons in some irresponsible
ah,
way. You want to just elaborate on that?
oh yes. We know now that there's an assumption in all SETI, search for extraterrestrial intelligence, of what's called mediocrity. Now, this is normally in scientific circles not a term we like to bandy about, but in this case, in this context, it doesn't mean someone is, you know, uh, uh, mediocre. It simply means it doesn't mean the Earth is mediocre. It just means it is typical. It is typical. It means it's a C student. It's the um, part of the main distribution of how things work in the cosmos. And there's every evidence that the Earth is typical in size and even its location in its habitable zone. The closest star system that we can see, Proxima Centauri, has a planet in it at the habitable zone, where, of course, its surface temperatures would allow liquid water. And that planet is almost exactly the same size as Earth, or the planet Venus in this solar system. So that there's nothing remarkable about the Earth. Now, this can be extended to say that the life forms and their behavior are also typical. Uh, Sadly enough, Michael, It means if you want to know how intelligent life in the universe comports itself, just turn on the news. And that's uh, that's something that even people in SETI don't like to talk about. You ask them, "Do you believe in mediocrity?" And they said, "Yes, yes." And I say, "Well, uh, the you keep talking about all the aliens will be friendly out there when on Earth there's a considerable amount of unfriendliness right here on this planet, and we would expect to find that elsewhere in the cosmos." And uh, they say, "Well, we'd rather not talk about that. It will endanger our funding through the university if you talk about that." Uh, and so on Mars, we apparently have evidence, quite dramatic evidence, of a massive thermonuclear holocaust. And
So they
what is,
probably,
oh, I'm sorry?
I was going to say that probably is mirrored in what we see around the world now, nuclear
Yes.
weapons possessed by the major states. And it doesn't take much to trigger a nuclear war. And so far,
It
we've
just
been
takes
lucky.
one.
So far, we've been lucky on Earth that it's been stopped at critical points. But it seems that Mars went through the same kind of development, and there were competing factions, and that led to the devastation that you describe in your book, Death on Mars.
Yes, it is. It is. There's an additional complication, however. The archaeology we have found on Mars, the remnants of the past culture on Mars, which could have been divided into several factions, where that would be not unexpected. However, the remnants of this culture appear to be primitive. There is evidence that they were interested in war. They have a lot of what appear to be fortified mesas, where there's a ramp, there's a mesa with structures on top, looking like perhaps fortifications, and then a ramp, earthen ramp, constructed down to the baseline level of the terrain. And this is found in several spots. And it appears that this was more or less Bronze Age, early Bronze Age, or advanced Stone Age, like the Mayans, or the Toltecs, or Old Kingdom Egypt. So the nuclear explosions that occurred, there were two very massive ones, and because we see that because of the slightly radioactive hotspots. During the Cold War, they developed radiation sensors of enormous sensitivity. So even if it's no longer a hazard to any living thing, you can still detect a tiny amount of radioactivity. And so we find these areas of Mars that have our hotspots, relatively, compared to their neighboring regions in radioactive potassium and also thorium. And so when we look at that, there are no craters. It looks as though someone dropped massive thermonuclear weapons the size of the Empire State Building from space onto Mars, and these exploded at perhaps a kilometer above the ocean surface. So they didn't create craters. And this is sadly the same pattern you see at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The atomic bombs used there were detonated in midair. They created no craters. And this was to maximize the shockwave damage on human dwellings. Um, there, and unfortunately also to kill as many people as possible. And so it was a terrible time on Earth, um, and this adds a complication to our interpretation of what happened on Mars. Um, the first thing I will say is I do not know exactly what happened on Mars. We must go up there immediately, boots on the ground, and dig through the ruins to find out if the Martians, the Martian culture, knew who it was had done this. Perhaps they had a quarrel with a much more advanced race that was spacefaring, and this quarrel escalated to the extent that the other race decided to wipe the planet Mars clean of almost all life. Uh, that's an additional complication, by the way. I'll speak to that in a minute. It appears that whoever did this not only did not like, had great hatred for human-like beings, because the faces depicted look like us. They don't look like gray aliens. They don't look like lizard men. They don't look like praying mantises. They look like us. And they built things that looks like constructions that we made on Earth. So whoever did this had an extreme hatred for human shaped beings like ourselves, but they not beyond that, they seem to hate biology itself. And this, it's like they used weapons that were far greater than were required to simply wipe out the civilization on Mars. They wanted to eradicate its entire biosphere. Um, uh, and these are unpleasant things. And they happened a long, long time ago. This happened, the best we can estimate, perhaps 300 million years ago on Mars. And then Mars went into a deep freeze, preserving, it lost almost all its atmosphere, and the liquid water was gone. And so the erosion of the artifacts of the archaeology stopped for the most part. So they are preserved to this day because Mars was kind of put into a deep freeze. So this is a profound puzzle. Where is Sherlock Holmes to figure this out?
Well, we know that
Elementary, my dear Watson. What's that?
well, we know that the CIA commissioned a remote viewer,
Yes.
Joseph McMonigal, to see what happened on Mars a million years ago, or concerning the destruction of its civilization. And McMonigal, I mean, he observed an intelligent species there. He observed ships evacuating people. What do you think of that remote viewing experiment?
I think, well, I worked in Washington, D.C. for 15 years, and I worked with the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies. I never was a part of any remote viewing, at least not consciously. And the story I heard was that the remote viewing operation was considered too valuable to stop because it had been right on so many other occasions. It had given them intelligence that no other um, uh, intelligence could pick up on several occasions. And But what also happened was uh, the signal. Uh, what they would do is they would get kind of information from remote viewing, and this information was considered, uh, they could corroborate. They would then try and corroborate it with other known methods of of intelligence gatherings, like satellites and monitoring signals, and even human intelligence on the ground. And they, oh, pardon me, and so they would always they knew from its past record that it would give them hints of intelligence that they could then corroborate with other sources. However, it was also kind of felt that it could give kind of basic levels of intelligence, but it was not always trustable in detail. It was subject, of course, to the impressions of the remote viewers, some of whom were considered very good at this, and some of whom were uh, less talented. McGonagall was considered a champion in this. Um, so what I'm saying is, it was considered a noisy signal. In other words, you had to take everything that was, it would turn out to give you basic facts, but details were not always very reliable. So we don't, I will also relate to you that the independent Mars investigation team, which was the original investigation of Cydonia Menza, was organized by Richard Hoagland, a brilliant man, if a little controversial on his own. Um, that the headquarters of that investigation was at Stanford Research Institute in Palo Alto. And we found out later, and I visited the place, they had the Mars room. They had big Mars maps, and they had all these red pins stuck at various places, and they had two Mars scientists there working. And well, one was actually an archeologist who'd investigated the Egyptian pyramids. The other fellow was a geologist. So these were people that working at Stanford Research Institute. We found out later that the remote viewing operation, which was then secret at SRI, was located just down the hall. When I visited there, I just visited the people I was working with. I didn't go down, I didn't go wandering around. In fact, they didn't, they escorted me because I knew there was classified work there, and I wasn't cleared for it. So then we found out that the remote viewing operation, which I believe was run by Hal Puthoff, was located right down the hall from the Mars investigation. And so our discoveries and verification of the work of DiPietro Molinar, showing that the face was in fact a carved face, like found in old Mexico by the Olmecs, a face in a helmet. And there was a five-sided pyramid nearby. This was immediately relayed to the remote viewers and probably triggered their desire to investigate Mars. So we actually, it's my belief that we actually may have triggered the remote viewing investigation. once
Yes.
again, another example that Cydonia Mensa investigations were a dynamo for Mars science. And
Right. So this remote viewing that was done by or commissioned by the CIA using Joseph McMonigal and some others that corroborated some of that early Mars investigation data. As far as the remote viewing is concerned, I mean, McMonigal, what he saw was, you know, a kind of like planetary civilization
yes,
imploding and people being evacuated on these ships.
and I find that quite fascinating. And I will say, as a scientist, every possibility is on the table at this point.
Hmm.
The fact that the faces depicted on Mars at least two places resemble our faces. There are no fangs, there are no big horns on their heads or anything like this. Suggests immediately that, Michael, we are Martians
Right.
transplanted to Earth. I mean, this is a very obvious possibility. The only thing that uh, prevents me from embracing that possibility wholeheartedly is the great age of the artifacts. Well, the fact that the Holocaust appears to have been dated to the time of, you know, 300 million years ago on Mars. And so there seems to be, there weren't even dinosaurs on Earth at the time when this occurred. So, um, and their other thing is the primitive nature of the civilization that appears to have produced these artifacts. So, but as I said, every possibility is on the table at this point. We must go up to Mars, boots on the ground, and if you ask any archaeology, any real field archaeologist, what does an archaeological site investigation look like? He says it's a dig. They call it a dig because you have to dig down carefully with shovels and and find tablets, hieroglyphs, things that are buried deeply by the planetary, whatever planetary catastrophe happened on Mars to take it from an Earth-like state to its present state, and the winds blowing over many, many millions of years. The important things, information is buried there. Or also there could be um, subterranean or tunnels and caves inside the face on Mars and the pyramid at Cydonia Mensa, similar to their the the internal structures in the pyramids of Giza. So here is the very positive thing about this. Now, this is a very tragic thing we have found apparently on Mars. And as I may have mentioned earlier on a previous interview, when it finally all came together in my mind, the culture on Mars, its vitality, its apparently industriousness, and then its awful end. When it all hit me, when I reached a kind of critical mass of knowledge on all of this, I wept like a child for about 4 minutes over Mars. And the only thing I then stopped myself and I said, John, you have to get a grip on yourself. This is good news because now we know it. We know it now. And we can make sure that such a thing never happens on Earth. Um, One of my major reasons for doing becoming involved in the Mars investigation, I was working at a nuclear weapons lab. At the time, we'd gone through a major crisis called Able Archer 83, where we came as close to nuclear war as we did in the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it was all secret. No one outside the security fences knew how badly things were going in Europe. And with the NATO versus Warsaw Pact crisis. And so if this discovery on Mars prevents us from having our own thermonuclear holocaust, then that is invaluable. But what's also important is that it puts an enormous impetus on the human race to go up to Mars as rapidly as possible with people. You can't do this with rovers. You could drive rovers around Cydonia Mensa for years and probably not see it in the wasteland there anything obviously artificial. You have to send people who have trained eyes and instincts. Part of this is psychic, and they have to dig and find the hieroglyphs, the stone tablets. Hopefully, we'll find murals depicting what the civilization on Mars looked like, and even murals depicting its end. And yes.
I just wanted to get your reaction to some new data that came in. It's probably, I mean, it's definitely not part of the scientific pool of data that you've been examining, but I think it's
Yes.
still useful. You know, this concerns one of the people that I've been working with for a few years, JP, who was former military, US Army, and he says he was taken by a group of Nordic human-looking extraterrestrials, and he was taken into the past where he saw the destruction of the Martian civilization. That's the article.
How interesting.
Yes,
How fascinating.
and before I let you respond, he describes seeing the destruction of the civilization and also the evacuation, where he saw at least 20 ships leaving, big ships leaving, taking the population to Earth. So yeah, I don't know. Could you react to
I,
that
I,
data?
I'm amazed that someone has had this experience. Um, I have been, I was told in Washington, D.C. by people who were absolutely reliable professionals in the intelligence community that there were people walking around on Earth who were from the Pleiades or someplace similar who looked and acted just like regular human beings. In fact, this is um, they weren't regarded as hostile, but in fact, the government was worried because they were getting security clearances. There was no way, this was back in the 90s, and their blood types, their genetic makeup was indistinguishable from other human beings. In fact, they even, it was a slightly, there was a slightly comedic aspect to this. This fellow said, the people I've been talking to are wondering if you have any ideas to how to tell them from regular, terrestrial human beings. And I said, well, a German Shepherd, canine units, they could probably, they could, they could probably sniff the difference between a human being from Earth and a human being from the Pleiades. And he said, his face lit up when I said this, and he walked out. He said, that's a very good idea. He says, I'm going to go tell them that. And he was talking apparently with some other group that was concerned with this. And a week later, he came back to my office and he said, I told them your idea and they were delighted and they're going to try it. It reminded me of the movie Ghostbusters or something. I was just sitting in my office working on some very rather mundane space problem when this conversation occurred. And but I'm quite fascinated to hear, and the people who did this took him back in time. They were, I guess, we call them Nordics or Palladians. I prefer Palladians. Um, and so that's if that is a report, and in ufology, I I mentioned to one ufologist, I said, the problem with ufology is there is no data, there is only reports
Mm-hmm.
that we have to sift through. And, some of them are reliable and some of them are, let's just say, not as reliable. But this is a fascinating, I will have to look. You have that interview recorded, I gather.
Oh, yes, yes. It's online on my website,
Oh, very good.
exopolitics.org.
I will watch it avidly, and
Perfect, perfect. So,
and yes,
so I wanted to kind of like shift now to, what you were saying about having boots on the ground, to kind of like go through the ancient sites there to discover, when Mars was populated, how long its civilization lasted for, and when this catastrophe
yes,
happened. So then I assume that you are in favor of Elon Musk's plans to colonize Mars
yes, I am.
using these reusable Starship rockets. So, is it feasible? I mean, can the Starship rockets really start this kind of like colonization of Mars, putting boots on the ground,
They they can.
or is there another propulsion system that's needed?
Oh, thank you, Mike. That's a very good question. Um, it appears, since Mars is a fairly close neighbor to the Earth, that's one of the reasons its past would have been more Earth-like. Mars is quite accessible to just chemical rockets, which are, you must realize that, you look at this rocket and you think, oh, this is all full of complicated stuff. No, mostly it's just sheet metal. The engines are complicated, but they were able to perfect those quite well. And the the rocket itself doesn't cost very much, especially when Elon Musk can really use them. And all they are is that they use liquid oxygen from the Earth's atmosphere and liquefied methane gas. And these things are both very abundant and very cheap. So the rockets, which the rocket boosters, which he has tested, um, the Starship system looks like it is very capable of taking humans to Mars. We don't need to develop anything more complicated at this point to reach Mars. We have dropped rovers on Mars that were several tons, and they're driving around just fine. One of them is nuclear powered. This could also, so they've shown that the nuclear power cells that we can build can operate things on Mars. Um, so people have suggested, that we have much more advanced technology recovered from UFO crashes, uh, and that we could reach Mars that way, and they wonder, why don't we use those things now? And then there's also the idea of using nuclear nuclear propulsion, which was quite well developed. They were getting to the point where they could test that in orbit. But and these things will all be developed, but they are unnecessary for the major goal. If the principal goal is to put human astronauts on Mars as soon as possible to investigate these ruins, then we do not need to uh, tie up that whole program with developing like nuclear rockets. One of the problems with developing nuclear rockets is nobody wants to test them on Earth. So you have to test them in space um, because they spew out a gas that their exhaust gases are radioactive. And so we don't want to do that on Earth. We have to test that on the moon or someplace. Um, and as far as gravity modification, anti-gravity, I believe the government is in possession of that technology and has been so for several decades. But once again, the government has reasons it does not want to release its knowledge to the public of that anti-gravity technology. So I think it's quite adequate. You know, if you haven't invented the car yet, or the car is reserved for only special ideas, you can always walk to. You can always walk. So we can walk to Mars using chemical rockets very, very quickly now. And the Elon Musk system of refueling the rockets in orbit and then sending them to Mars, I believe it will be very successful. So this, by the way, so I'm very much in favor of Elon Musk's program, and I believe he should be funded by NASA directly to accelerate his work. I will also tell you, it is my opinion now that the government, the US government, has decided to proceed on what you call a path of Mars disclosure. The disclosure that there's life on other planets and that there's intelligent life on other planets like ourselves, and to disclose that using the evidence on Mars. Now, why would it want to do that? Well, for one thing, the evidence that this is happening is that the new NASA director, Jared Isaacson, announced during his confirmation hearings, he said, it is the policy of the US government to place humans on Mars as rapidly as possible. The Elon Musk. The US government has embraced the Elon Musk. We're not going to bother about the moon. We already have a space station. We're going to go straight for Mars. And not only that, when Donald Trump was asked about UFOs and UAPs, he smiled and said, "How about this planet Mars?" We're going to send Elon Musk to Mars. And if you realize what he was doing, he was answering a question about extraterrestrial intelligence being out there. And he said, well, we're going to go to Mars. And because of the Martian archaeology, if we go to Mars, and I believe it's we have overwhelming evidence there's life on Mars right now, was past life, and there's present life on Mars. We have archaeology. And the key, Michael, is this is very non-threatening to the human race. These people are
Can you
dead.
can you explain this soft disclosure plan
Yes, I
that you
will.
think exists involving Mars and introducing the global public to advanced extraterrestrial intelligence?
Yes, yes, Michael. Thank you so much for that opportunity. Mars disclosure means that you basically, and they could do this today, they could assemble a group of Mars scientists and they would say with 99% probability there was life began on Mars as it did on Earth and evolved on Mars, um, because Mars had a long period of liquid water, Earth-like conditions. So that's point number one. Point number two is we have archaeology on Mars of an advanced, you know, it looks like archaeology from primitive civilizations on Earth from antiquity, but it is still evidence of very sophisticated building techniques and high intelligence. And third, we can get there right now with present technology, especially as developed by Elon Musk. So those 3 points turn disclosure that we are not alone in the universe, that there's intelligent life on other planets, and that we can be spacefaring. It turns disclosure into a science fiction adventure movie that the whole human race is going to be part of. So this is a very positive development. It also means that a crash program to put humans on Mars will greatly stimulate technology and space, especially space technology for the human race. And the civilization looks primitive. And they are dead, so they are not a threat to the human race. There's no war of the worlds danger in this that is always, by the way, has always been in the back of the human mind. Now, if we contrast that with UFO UAP disclosure, the reason that is much more problematical is the idea that advanced aliens have come who are alive. They are orbiting the planet right now. uh, they are abducting people. They are mutilating cattle. They are even mutilating people. There have been military clashes with them, and perhaps a secret illegal treaty with one group of aliens or more that was never ratified by Congress. So it's a constitutional breach. Uh, the UFO UAP disclosure, full disclosure, will lead to a constitutional crisis in this country because it will expose that the government has uh, basically been in breach of its own constitution for many years. So that's very upsetting to people. We don't want that. We instead want people to embrace the idea of a living cosmos, an intelligent living cosmos that we can be a participant in. And you do that with Mars disclosure. This is a soft path of disclosure. And what it does is it it gives the human race it preserves the illusion, by the way, that the human race is still the apex predator in the solar system. And Michael, you are very familiar with the human race. And you know that they like good news and they don't like bad news. They like being told that they are they're remarkable creatures, a little lower than the angels, and this makes them happy. And if you go up to Mars and you find this dead civilization, and but by the way, the last thing the government will disclose at Mars is why Mars looks, why is this civilization dead? That will be the last thing on the agenda. What they're going to concentrate is on life on Mars, intelligent life on Mars, life on Mars, archaeology on Mars, and let's go to Mars. That's what they're going to talk about, those three things. And other questions about what exactly happened on Mars, they'll say, well, that's under investigation. And that is to make the human race make this into an adventure, a science fiction adventure, as opposed to some traumatic experience where the human race is now in fear of an extraterrestrial invasion or something or conquest, something like that. So Michael, that's why we're going to do it. And we're going to do it because it's a feel-good exercise.
Okay, so you feel confident that this kind of soft disclosure using Mars and Starship
Yes,
to establish colonies there is a safe way of doing disclosure. But
absolutely.
but obviously there's seems that there's been a surge in UFO sightings, and now does that kind of like something that's going to end in a kind of like genuine disclosure, or will it just be? And I think you've kind of like already intimated that it's too disturbing, that this would be something that would be too controversial. So better to start with the Mars disclosure plan
Yes.
rather than this kind of UFO. Well, they're reverse engineered craft built by corporations that use crashed extraterrestrial craft. That would be too upsetting, too disruptive, and maybe that's for the future. But now we start with Mars.
Exactly. Michael, you put it in a nutshell very well. It's a positive. It's a way to put a top spin on this. Uh, you know, uh, Spin is not just important in quantum physics. It's important in playing ping pong or anything else. It's putting the spin on the ball. So this gives the disclosure a great top spin as far as the human race is concerned. And yes, let us say, if the government decided to try and disclose that it had gravity modification technology, then people would, of course, ask, where did you get this technology? And right now, there are two answers. There are two possible answers, probably both of which are partially true. One is that, we traded the Nazi monster Hans Kammler of the SS a plane ticket to Argentina and escaped from the Nuremberg trials in return for the anti-gravity technology which the Nazis had developed in World War II and could never turn into anything employable in war. So that's one thing. The government traded this knowledge for and let this absolute monster live after the war in order to get the anti-gravity from him. Or the second one is, these UFOs, they crashed, and after we removed the bodies, we then analyzed the wreckage and figured out anti-gravity technology from that. The U.S. government does not want to talk about either one of those scenarios. They'll
Right.
talk about that later. Let's go to Mars. They'll just say, and you know how one of the reasons ventriloquists are so common is that you get the audience to pay attention to the talking doll.
Right. Right.
And so the human race has a very selective set of attention. You can get them to focus on one thing and then pick their pocket with the other hand, etc. So what we're going to do is take advantage of that. And by the way, there is survival value in that. If you give people an array of news, they will pick the good news and focus on that. The human race is a bunch of optimists. And being an optimist has survival value. There's a story I heard, I don't know whether it was true or not, but it was an interesting story about finding a man who had washed ashore in a lifeboat, still full of supplies. He'd washed ashore on a large desert island, a large tropical island in the South Pacific. It had plenty of coconuts, plenty of crabs, and things to eat, and lots of fresh water. And they found that he had used the gun on the lifeboat to shoot himself almost immediately after he arrived on this island, because he looked at the entire situation and decided he was a deep pessimist and decided that this wasn't going to work out, even though he had all these supplies and he had this wonderful island to live on. And he couldn't face solitary, the idea of being alone or something like this. So that, if he'd been an optimist, he would have said, there's plenty of coconuts here, plenty of crabs. I can have seafood. I have coconuts, and there's plenty of fresh water. I'll be fine. I still have supplies in my boat, and I'll eventually get rescued. And that's what the optimist would say. And the pessimist would say, oh, we'll probably be stranded on this island until we die. Nobody will ever find us. And they do away with themselves in despair. So the human race is a bunch of survivors. And that doesn't mean it actually balances all the data in front of it it doesn't give equal weight to its attention. It doesn't give equal attention to all of the data. It focuses on the positive, and some cases goes into denial about the negative. When we went to the moon during the 60s, there were plenty of UFO. There was plenty of UFO activity. There were some just notorious cases. The Great Swamp Cast case, before we landed on the moon 6 times, they'd accumulated an enormous amount of evidence that UFOs were extraterrestrial, but no one paid any attention to it. I wrote, and Michael, the ETs did not apparently interfere in our moon landings. We seem to be operating in some kind of, under some kind of prime directive where, direct, overt intervention like invasions or something like this just don't occur. They like to show that they're out there, but given the human predilection to select what it decides to assign importance to in its attention, the human race just ignores that. I predict we will go to Mars just fine. We will find a dead civilization there. And still, if you will ask the public if they believe that UFOs are extraterrestrial, most of them will say, no. And because that's the nature of the human psyche. It is it psychologically guards itself against things that it can't deal with.
Mm. Well, I wanted to ask you about your most recent book, where you talk about the suppression
Yes,
of the UFOs, and you talk about the technologies that have been suppressed and some of the principal figures that were involved in developing these reverse engineered craft and kind of like anti-gravity propulsion that is used in classified programs. Now, you also talk about a Star Trek future. So,
yes.
you want to explain how this Star Trek future is going to emerge? Is it going to be through, discoveries on Mars, or because of the UFO kind of like cover up being exposed, or because of inventors being allowed to finally release their patents on anti-gravity? Yeah, how's this Star Trek future going to unfold?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Michael. A very good question. I believe, and I wrote in the book Cosmic Awakening, the human race is like being a student at a university who's gone from high school to now is at the university. And uh, one of the fraternities or sororities has decided they want to recruit you. So they invite you to parties and show you all sorts of interesting stuff, and they introduce you to their most admirable members and things like this, and it's part of your initiation. They are evaluating you, you are evaluating them, and ultimately the goal is to welcome you into this fraternity of, in this case, um, enlightened species in the galaxy. I believe, I believe with all my heart that there is an enlightened community out in the stars that views us with great scientific interest and even affection in some cases. The Pleiadians, obviously, they've made it clear that they like us, well, because we are their kindred. I'm only a theoretical physicist. I do not understand how somebody from the Pleiades could come to Earth, have children with human beings that can't be told, that the genetic material is basically just same as terrestrial humans. I don't understand how that happened, but I will believe the reports. Now, just like the world community on Earth, we have, countries like Australia, uh, the United States, Great Britain, Canada, France, Germany, the European countries that are Western European countries that are really quite enlightened. And then we also have countries like North Korea and that are just seem to have gone from one disaster after another and have great oppression of their people and rule through terror. The governments rule through terror. So just let us imagine that the Earth is not an aberration on the cosmos, but it's part of its fabric. That means the Earth, in a sense, is a reflection of the realities of the cosmos. That is both good and bad. However, there does appear, as on Earth, to be some kind of fraternity of enlightened peoples. And I believe they have been protecting us from any overt intervention by some of these negative people out there. That protection is not perfect, but it has been the UFO cover up has been successful for 80 years because there has been no War of the Worlds scenario that happened. And so it has been kept quiet, and it is unfortunately, they also turned it over to the cloak and dagger department of our intelligence agencies. And they have handled that problem the way they handle, foreign intelligence problems. So I think we are being protected, and we are being brought along by very controlled contacts. The whole UFO phenomenon, as I discuss in the book, can be viewed as an elaborate display of technology and presence by extraterrestrials who are generally quite enlightened because they haven't tried to conquer the earth. They haven't done any great violence here. And this means that just like in Star Trek, where it was the Vulcans, in the Star Trek kind of mythos, it was the Vulcans who initiated contact with the human race and basically adopted us into the Galactic Federation. And as you remember, Spock, one of the most interesting characters on Star Trek, his father was a Vulcan and his mother was a terrestrial human woman. And he was obviously, you couldn't call him a hybrid. He was just a product of intermarriage. And because the cultures of Vulcan and Earth were so different, this made him always slightly uncomfortable. He was uncomfortable around a lot of human beings, but they accommodated him. The episodes where he went back to Vulcan and had to deal with the mores of Vulcan society left no confusion about why he sought to run around in a starship rather than living on Vulcan with his fellow, the children of his forefathers, so it was a fascinating show. But by the way, in addition to the prime directive that said that this Federation of Enlightened Peoples had all agreed that you could not interfere in the development of primitive cultures. You had to let them come into their own and find out that they were not alone in the universe by themselves. So there was the prime directive. There was another aspect of the Star Trek series that was discussed in several episodes, and what it was that the human race, people like you and I, Michael, were a super-terrestrial phenomenon. For some reason, very humanoid people were quite common in the stars. The Vulcans being an example, of course, and also some of the other races, the Andorians, the Betazoids, and so that the human race had kindred, basically people who viewed us as kindred in the stars, and therefore felt very natural adopting us as students. And of course, in the Star Trek, the human race thrived and prospered as part of the Federation, and became one of its most dynamic elements. Um,
I
so
wanted to ask
yes,
I wanted to ask about, when all this is going to happen, when the Star Trek future is going to happen. On the one hand, you described the soft disclosure process involving
yes,
Mars, that you would actually have starships with colonists landing on Mars, digging and saying, "Hey, look at that. We found evidence of ancient civilizations here." And so that would suggest that the disclosure process would begin once manned colonists land on Mars. Maybe it begins before that, but that's one path, and that would suggest, like the 2030s, when this kind of
yes.
Star Trek future could happen. On the other hand, you have a lot of people now talking about the UFOs that have been that have crashed, that have been secretly studied in classified programs, that have anti-gravity and all of that. And that to me is like, well, there seems to be a push or a faction that wants to get disclosure out that way. So
That's a
when, like that
very important.
timetable, that timetable, I would expect that that timetable would be quicker. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Uh, uh, well, I view, there is a phrase that people use is called catastrophic disclosure, where everything all suddenly just comes out at once, and the human race is basically in shock. Uh, but the human race is a bunch of survivors, and we're from a long line of survivors, and we will do fine in either case. But that will be much more difficult to get through. Let's just say I explored in science fiction what catastrophic disclosure would look like, and that scenario was in a science fiction novel called Morning Star Pass: The Collapse of the UFO Cover-Up. In that novel, two women news anchors bring down the UFO cover-up, and the ending, and this is actually, they are recipients of leaked classified information from the center of the UFO cover-up, because the existence of a secret treaty has allowed the upper echelons of the UFO cover-up to, instead of studying the aliens, they're now decided to work for the very hostile aliens. And so there's a faction within the UFO cover-up that wants the cover-up to end, and it doesn't care if it's catastrophic or not. It just has to end. So the ending is it ends with an attempted coup d'etat by the secret government, which is now at its very core the UFO cover-up at upper echelons, and this is furiously resisted by the constitutional government. And I won't spoil any, but we're making this into a movie. It's going to be made into a movie. And because we're presenting in science fiction, a science fiction scenario, people will have a certain amount of separation. Um, but what it will do is it will show that a government that is violating its own constitution in order to perpetuate the UFO cover-up, and that cannot continue. It doesn't in the novel. It does not. And but I depict, the two women are glamorous news anchors, of course, but they're also very tough and very smart. And they are very brave, and in the end, the UFO cover-up is destroyed because if it is not destroyed in the novel, the it will destroy the human race. So the UFO cover-up must end as a part of a survival strategy of the human race. So anyway, so we're going to make that into a movie, and I hope that the members of the UFO upper echelons watch it and realize that they can't do what they're that the UFO cover-up has to be phased out somehow. Now, one, if we go to Mars rapidly, one of the best places for face-to-face encounters for humans and aliens would be on Mars itself, and that would give human beings a feeling of safety that at least there was one planet removed. Um, so what I'm hoping will happen is the Mars disclosure will so fascinate the American public that it will take away all pressure on the government to go into the rather sordid details of the whole UFO cover up, and that the Mars disclosure will basically get people 99% of the way there, and then the final disclosure of they will have found a dead primitive civilization on Mars, and the idea that extrapolating that to living advanced civilizations elsewhere in the stars, that will be easy to do and also um, not threatening to the human race. It will become apparent that the galactic community has not interfered with our attempts to find our way in the universe. And that in itself is very reassuring. To me, it's very reassuring that the Apollo landings were allowed to occur. I will tell you, my good friend who's very active in Hollywood and active on this movie project for the science fiction novel, David Pfaff, he uh, he he said someone asked him, "Well, you say we should go to Mars. What about the moon?" He says, "We can't go to the moon because they're living aliens on the moon." And that's a little too scary. He says, "We're going to go to Mars because the aliens up there are dead."
I
And
see.
so the public reason given by the government will be, well, we don't need to go to the moon. We've already been there, and that's true. And I have no doubt about that, by the way. And uh, they uh, they will simply go to Mars because the moon is boring. Actually, the moon could be quite exciting if you try and land there right now. But one of the so anyway, so that's his theory. He says I was explaining, well, we've already been to the moon. He says, no, John, that's not why we're not going back to the moon immediately. We're going to Mars first, is because Mars has dead aliens on it, and the aliens on the moon are alive, and we don't want to deal with that confrontation. So it'll be it's and he's a quite sophisticated student of the human race himself, and so that's what we're going to do, Michael. That's what I think we're going to do. At least that is the plan. Now, there is a saying that goes, if you want God to laugh, tell him your plans.
Right. Okay. Well,
And
John,
yes, I'm sorry.
yeah, well, I wanted to bring this interview to a close. I think
Oh,
you
okay.
finished, on some very kind of like persuasive scenarios where we're heading. So, if people wanted to kind of like find out more about this science fiction kind of novel that you were talking about, or get in touch with you, well, where do people go?
Oh, one thing I can do is they can watch, there's a video synopsis of the science fiction novel. It's just a synopsis, but it's a synopsis on YouTube called Morningstar Pass, The Collapse of the UFO Cover-Up, the third edition. There were previous editions. This one is a more polished. This is shows the basic plot line of the novel. And also, you should contact, let's see, you know, I'm trying to think of who you should officially contact on this thing, who is in charge of this. And I stay tuned. We will have some official contact. Well, you can also contact me on X. I do have a X account. Uh, it's at PhD Brandenburg, and I can receive certainly messages there, and I post regularly there, and I'm talking about all these issues in some detail on my X postings. So that would be the best way to do is to contact me, is to go through my X account at PhD Brandenburg on X. So,
Well, I want to thank you, John, for.
oh, Michael, it's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed your questions. You're a learned man and ask learned questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I believe I'm just doing my job. I feel like I was sent here.
Well, you're doing an excellent job in raising consciousness and making people aware of the scientific data for life on Mars. So I think the world owes you a great debt, and I hope they do name that ocean after you. Though I think that would be a nice kind of like ring to it, the Brandenburg Ocean.
The Brandenburg Ocean of Mars. I know it does have a nice ring to it, I think, yeah. Mike. Thank you for it.
Okay.
I have been pestering people in NASA that they are neglecting to give me priority. I regard that as really kind of scandalous as far as the academic community, that you can talk about this wonderful discovery and then not mention who actually made it.
Yes, indeed. Well, I hope you succeed. I feel confident in the future that you will be recognized for your outstanding work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again for coming on Exopolitics Today.
And to all our beloved audience, live long and prosper.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.